Hey rice fans, welcome to another episode of Rice and Advice. I'm Dr. Jarrod Hardke, Rice Extension Agronomist with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. Today let's spend just a little time talking about growth stages of rice during reproductive development. Really what we're worried about here, or what we often refer to as the boot stage of rice. A lot of different opinion and definition of how to break apart that stage and time different things, particularly as it relates to nitrogen applications, fungicide timing, and moving into heading. So let's dig in there and get into the heart of it and how we can better time those applications and management of our crop. Let's get started. So in earlier episodes we've talked about internode elongation and how it relates to mid-season nitrogen timing. So we're actually back out in our planting date study at this point. Going to look at actually some rice that was only planted about the middle of May. Hasn't been flooded for all that long. Been progressing very rapidly. Try to have a really quick look at what's going on here as we sort of progress through these stages of plant development. We try to take a very quick look. Yeah, if I can get it smoothed out just to that point, we can, absolutely. We can see if we take a very close look, we can get it focused in. You can see the slightest bit of movement off of that internode. So we're actually moving there. Rice hasn't been planted that long. Again, I don't know how well it shows up on screen. You can see it moving just a little bit. So at the end of the day, as soon as we are approaching that, we're maybe at a 1/4 inch internode elongation. Really like to talk about 1/2 inch internode elongation a lot of times, and that's really around the time, any time around from panicle initiation, green ring through 1/2 inch, you can kind of argue is really the very beginning of early boot. You have a panicle and it's beginning to move up the plant. So this kind of gives you an idea that's very technically where you want to start. We don't even yet have a clear visible panicle. I prefer to consider really the true beginning of early boot, that 1/2 inch, when you can see that very small panicle at that stage. It's only 1 millimeter or 2 long at that point that you can pick out. So now we've moved to our very early May, really last day of April planting date. We'll have another look. Again, going to dissect the plant at this point. The key thing to remember is once we really move into those reproductive growth stages, after joint movement, we're really depending on plant dissection to give us an idea of where that plant development is at this point in time. And this one, much larger stem, a lot more robust, going to be a lot easier to see on this exactly what's going on. You can actually see we have a pretty good amount of joint movement. At this point in time, again, you're going to add up. You can see that there are actually 2 spaces within this stem that have internode space. So you're actually going to add up both of those spaces to count it. You can try to disregard the space in the middle, but in reality you're getting very close to 1 inch internode elongation at that point. And if you start looking very closely at it, you can still make out the panicle that I'm pointing to there, white triangular kind of pointed tuft that's inside there. That's the very beginning of the panicle, and we'll move on from here. So now we're going to hop over really quick to our next planting date. This one went in the ground about mid-April. Have a look at it. And actually that separating that actually helped me out quite a bit. Actually get that stem separated. So we're going to peel things back. Have a look at what's going on. It looks like we're, at least to that measurement, we're a little over 2 inch internode elongation, or 2 inch joint movement, depending on how you want to describe it. You'll notice that the flag leaf is not out at this point. I'm not going to unroll everything in here, but you do have another leaf coming here. Down inside, if we peel it back, that one is actually probably just might be, that last leaf might be the flag leaf trying to make its way out there. We'll do some more closer inspection in just a second. So here again, peeling back to see what's going on inside. Find the panicle, get it unrolled. And so at this stage, finally dug it out of there. The panicle is still very small. Not a lot going on, so we're still kind of in that transition period when we're going to jump from early boot into mid boot. It's kind of right where we are. It's down there. It's going to be very hard to see at this point, but the panicle is pretty small. If I hadn't broken it apart then a little bit, you would actually find that it's closing in on a 2-inch panicle length, which is kind of going to be the point at which you transition it over into that mid boot stage at that point. So that's what we're looking for there. And we're not going to be too far off. And as I kind of peel that plant further apart, see what's going on with the leaves. Again, we're worried about what's going on internally. See, there's the flag leaf. Now once I unroll it enough, I finally found that next leaf coming, so that tells us that we were on the early side with this one. Still do have a little bit to go, just entering that mid boot. Still a little ways from getting that flag leaf out really at all. And that's what we would expect without the flag leaf actually coming out at all. To just now be entering the mid boot phase is trying to push out of there and come out, but a long way from having that flag leaf collar out. Okay, so we've had a look at some of the earlier stages in reproductive development through early boot. Now let's see if we can have a look at one that looks more like it's in the mid boot stage. So try to find a main stem tiller. See that pointed tight rolled leaf in the middle there? It'd actually be the flag leaf working its way out at this point, but again, it's still not out. You still can't see the collar on it. So, well, again, we're gonna dissect that outer visual there. That flag leaf not all the way out does give us a rough idea of the stage that this plant is in, but it's always much more helpful to dissect it and confirm. We're gonna start peeling this apart. I'm easily, again, using my hand to kind of measure what's going on here. At about 4-inch elongation at this point, and that's going to be really close to the base of that panicle, it looks like. And we're not worried about some of the other stuff, trying to get it torn away so we can have a look at the panicle inside. You can see it's another node up. There we go. Now we can actually look at and see panicle still developing inside that tight rolled leaf. You can see some of the kernels that have been formed showing in here. So I'm going to lightly peel it back. Try not to break it, but I can see the next node that's down, so I can have an estimation of that length. And so what you can see from that tip using my fingers, that's over a 2-inch panicle at that point. That flag leaf's about, starting to come out to halfway out of the leaf before it. So this is a pretty good way to say pretty definitively that we're right in the middle of mid boot at this point in time. So continuing on now, going to have a look at our early April planting date. This rice is getting a lot larger. Actually see from the one I pulled, this one's actually entered late boot. I can tell that it's in the overall late boot stage because of what I'm going to call the flag leaf is all the way out, and I can see that collar. If you feel down, certainly you can see how the stem's a little bit swollen midway down. We're going to call this the late boot stage. Because that flag leaf is all the way out, it gives you an easily identifiable characteristic there to say that you are approximately 1 week out from 50% heading. Keep in mind that 50% heading is when we define any part of the panicle is really sticking out above that flag leaf collar in any way. So let's try having a look. We're going to start down low this time. And obviously we should have plenty of elongation at this point because everything's moved on. We do. Got a lot of joint movement now. So we're going to try to slowly dissect some of the stem, preferably with a cleaner knife, and find our way here. Try to peel back to find the panicle. And basically what I'm looking at here is I've got at least 3, 4, probably 5-inch internode elongation at this point. Trying to gently peel back to the panicle at this point. There it is. Getting it open, so it's still down here. Just below, the flag leaf collar's all the way up here, so it's still got a little ways to go up here. But from a general standpoint, different cultivars are going to have different panicle sizes, lengths, things like that. That's not out of the question, but as a general rule, for it to have moved up this far, we know we're in the late boot, but the other way, beyond just the flag leaf at that stage that we can say that we're in the late boot stage, is generally, very generally speaking, by panicle length. And so within that, everybody's hands are certainly a little bit different size, but as a general rule, you can use your hand to measure. So that's what we'll do here, just to check it out. You see a lot of these pictures sent, how does this look, what stage am I in, things like that. And of course, I'm not getting everything laid out here perfectly, but you can see that that is going to be well over a 5-inch long panicle. So once we're 5 inches or beyond, in addition to seeing that flag leaf all the way out, just added confirmation that you're fully in the late boot stage, and we're getting very, very close to seeing heads pop out of here. Certainly probably within the next week, or actually less, obviously just depending on temperatures and development. So that's a really good way to have a look at it. Okay, went and pulled a few plants from some earlier maturing cultivars out there, try to get a better look. Some of these look to be a little bit more in swollen boot. You can see those. Again, swollen a little bit higher up, getting a lot closer to the flag leaf. Unfortunately, don't have anything quite at the split boot stage. This is about as close as it gets. I mean, it is just right there. Well, actually just about perfect, just barely. I mean, we're like maybe hours too early to a day where this boot would be split open. We can easily pick out on this one. The flag leaf has been out. It's fully extended above the next leaf. Obviously with the boot splitting, not too hard to see. One point before I tear this open, one thing to remember when we're looking and you're talking about that 50% heading date in the DD50 program, what it's referring to is when that panicle, basically any portion, I usually like to say about a 1/2 inch above, about a 1/2 inch of that panicle pushes out past that flag leaf collar. There, that's 50% heading right there at that point. That's what we're referring to on that date. So it's not referring to the panicle being all the way out, just when it starts to exert at that point, because anytime after that, we're actually going to start to flower and begin the real countdown to making the rice crop at that point, trying to get all the kernels filled, hopefully under the right weather conditions. So at this point in time, the panicle is really close, within a couple of inches of reaching that flag leaf collar. So we should have 4th of July headed rice at this point. Trying to flip this panicle out. Actually looks really nice at this point. Yeah, we're going to be in really good shape with that. Hopefully he's got a lot of friends out there. Not just here in these plots, but throughout the state at this point is what we're going to hope for. So a very nice panicle. Very long, well over that 5-inch length we were referring to, so this is closer to, if you look at it the right way, if you're used to measuring rice water depth with your hand, that's going to be out there over 8 inches, if you figured out how to do that. So this one's going to be in great shape. This is kind of movement we're looking for. In just a couple of days, we're going to actually have headed rice out here. And so a great example of a really boot split on that one. And kind of its partner, the other tiller right there beside. It's very close as well. I'm gonna have to peel back just a little bit more to find it. It's not quite as ready. See, it's getting really close. Maybe it's a day behind that one, but it's right there. You can have a good look. Pretty much the same story as the one before. So let's have one more close-up look at some of what we've pulled so far. Looking here, I'm gonna bring it up close enough for hopefully we can see in better relief here against the tailgate. Very slight internode elongation, 1/4 inch or so. Looking at what's progressing. We have just a little bit more elongation here. Again, add up the 2 sections, so we're probably looking at close to 1 inch. You can see, more easily see now the very beginning of the panicle, that triangle elongated pointed shape there. Move here, of course I did a little rough job on this dissection, but you can see much greater elongation. We're probably looking at about 2 inch internode elongation, and the panicle still relatively short, so we're still in the early boot phase here, but that panicle is starting to gain some length, and so we're rapidly probably about to get out of the early boot stage in that plant. Move to the next one. It's difficult to see the upper portion of the plant, but you do have the flag leaf collar still coming out. You can see this pointed leaf out there. It's still coming on. And at this point, we do have a panicle that, looking down here, the internode is well over 2 inches in length at this time. The internode length is a little longer than that, but that got broken off. So with that length of a panicle at that point, you know we're in the mid-boot phase with that flag leaf on its way out, but not all the way out yet. And then finally, the surefire way, obviously a flag leaf collar being all the way out. Notice there's no pointed leaf coming out of here, so if you see that, you know you're in the late boot stage at this point, because the flag leaf's out, no other leaf is on the way. But if you do dissect and find there, you're going to find a panicle that's probably going to be greater than 5 inches in length. And when we're almost beginning to hit heading, you'll see it start to split the boot. That panicle start to show. I've already peeled it open a little bit, so that's showing a little bit more than it would naturally in the field at this point. And ultimately that panicle is going to push all the way out through that collar, and as soon as it's part of the way out, we're going to call that 50% heading if you're looking at a DD50 program. And here we are again, swollen boot in the middle of late boot at this point in time. So that's kind of a progression through the beginning of internode elongation, what is in reality the beginning of boot, where we start there all the way to what we would call 50% heading if we were a couple more days from now and actually had a few sticking out of there. So that pretty much runs us through the gamut of reproductive growth stages in rice, more or less. We didn't catch everything exactly perfect from beginning to end, but a really good example and subset across these planting dates to give us the opportunity to show some of the specifics, both externally outside the plant and internally after we do some dissection on it. So giving you all of that information, now what are we going to do with it? Well, hopefully we're going to use it to actually better time some of those mid-season nitrogen applications as well as some of our fungicide applications. On the mid-season nitrogen timing, we've covered this a little bit in just the previous 2 episodes, both referring to just the mid-season timing itself and using Green Seeker to help with that process. But ultimately what we're after is looking for around that 1/2 inch internode elongation. We hope we're around 4 weeks since we established the flood and incorporated the pre-flood nitrogen. A bare minimum of 3 weeks before we make a mid-season application, but really with all the data we've gotten over the years, it really looks like waiting 4 weeks is the best way to get the most out of your mid-season nitrogen application. So when you really try to break down the development, almost regardless of cultivar, variety, hybrid, you name it, length of maturity, as a general rule, again, general rule, not always 100%, to the day, but from green ring to 50% heading, you're looking at approximately 28 days. So to me, an easy way to break that down and to think about it is from green ring or panicle initiation, you really have about 7 days to reach 1/2 inch internode elongation. And what to me is, again, easily considered the very beginning of early boot. You've then got about another 7 days until you go from having a less than 2 inch panicle to having a greater than 2 inch panicle, and the flag leaf has begun to move up out of the planets. That would be that pointed leaf at that time. That's where you're moving into the mid-boot phase. And then 7 days after that, you get the flag leaf all the way out. You've got a panicle that's probably 5 inches or greater in length at that time. You're about 7 days out from heading at that point. And then finally, you're going to hit heading at around that day 28. Now, certainly, again, sometimes it's going to be 26 days, 30 days, depends on the weather, planting date, cultivar, a lot of conditions. That's a very generalized way to go. If you consider green ring day 0, ½ inch is at day 7, you're in the very beginning of early boot. You hit mid-boot at about day 14, late boot at about day 21, and at day 28, you're going to hit 50% heading. And from there, we're going to go on to grain fill. So the timing on that mid-season nitrogen application is going to be, again, hopefully 4 weeks since the pre-flood was established. Then we're going to have ½ inch internode elongation plus about 14 days, all the way right up against late boot, that flag leaf coming out, that we really have that window, we get the same response out of that mid-season nitrogen application. So a pretty broad window. A little bit more detailed discussion has to do with fungicide application timing. So if we're going after smut prevention, kernel smut and false smut, the goal there is the closer we get to boot split and heading, really our efficacy against the smuts can have the potential to go down, particularly once we get to late boot. From there, again, we're 7 days away from heading. From there toward heading, that efficacy goes down. And once we hit boot split, really at boot split, any panicles where the boot is splitting open, you can really consider them largely missed with that fungicide application to prevent smut. So the goal is really to be about 14 days after green ring, 14 days before heading, kind of right at that midpoint, the very beginning of mid-boot. So you got that flag leaf starting to come out at that point in time. That's an ideal time. Anytime from there on into just a little bit of late boot. Again, don't want to keep from getting too close to the boot split and beginning heading where we really lose efficacy at that time. One issue can be trying to make a smut prevention application and a blast prevention application at the same time. And unfortunately, to get the greatest benefit out of those two applications, they really don't line up ideally at one time. So I could argue that you can actually save your money if you go ahead and go with the earlier proper timing with the smut prevention application, spraying that fungicide on the earlier side, and get the full benefit from that application. And then if you need to make an application of a fungicide for blast prevention, that you make it later once heading has actually begun and get the full benefit from that. Honestly, if you split it apart and do those two timings and get the greatest benefit from both of them, it's easily going to pay for that additional flying it takes to split them up, because you're going to get maximum benefit from the two. So stick with that PD, panicle differentiation, plus 14 days, or again, about 14 days before heading for the smut application. If you're going with the blast application, 2 application approach, which again be very serious situation, history of blast, heavy nitrogen, stays wet from tree lines and dew a lot. There we're actually going to want to spray in late boot to heads beginning to come out with the first application, and then come back again when about 50% of the panicles are sticking out of the boot with the second shot. If we don't have that much risk, that much concern, a cultivar that's not that susceptible to blast, and you want to go with the one fungicide approach, then you're going to want to try to make that application when about 1/3 of the panicle is sticking out of the boot above that flag leaf collar. And that's going to be the one-shot approach. And again, particularly when you're going with that one-shot approach and leaning toward a higher fungicide rate, when we're only going with one, is going to reap the better benefits for protection in that scenario. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Rice and Advice. Hope you've learned a lot about the reproductive development stages of rice and how we can use those to better time some of our nitrogen and fungicide applications. If you have any questions about these, please give us a call, text, email. Whatever we can do to help, we'll be there. See you next time.